Our next guest on the Strategerist is the great Walter Isaacson. He's written about some of the world's greatest innovators like Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, Benjamin Franklin, Jennifer Doudna, Albert Einstein, even Leonardo DaVinci. His most recent work takes a look not at a person, though, but at a turning point in history. The Greatest Sentence Ever Written, a small but inspiring book that analyzes the second sentence of the Declaration of Independence. We're excited he's here for Engage at the Bush Center, presented by Next Point, where he'll take an in-depth look at the greatest sentence ever written, alongside Bush Center CEO Shiloh Brooks. Welcome to the Strategerist. Thank you so much for being here. We're with pre-eminent historian, one of the greatest biographers of our time, Walter Isaacson. Thank you for being here.
What a joy it is to be here. I love this library, and it's an honor to be with you.
How do you pick who you're going to talk about? How do you choose what you're going to spend so much of your life on?
You know, when I came out of college, a friend of mine and I, Evan Thomas, who you may know, he's been here before, we decided to write a book called The Wise Men, about the people who did foreign policy after World War II. And it ends with Vietnam, and I wanted to continue it, so I did Henry Kissinger, because I didn't feel there'd been a fair biography of him up until then. But after dealing with Henry Kissinger for 2 or 3 years, I decided, man, I got to do somebody who's been dead for 250 years, because Henry was a strong personality to deal with. So I did Benjamin Franklin, because it was the roots of realism in policy. With Franklin, I realized he was a great scientist, and some of us don't love science as much as we should. So I did Einstein. And so what I'm saying is one thing leads to another. After I did Ben Franklin and Einstein, Steve Jobs said, let's take a walk. And then he said, do me next. And I thought, okay, Ben Franklin, Albert Einstein, you arrogant, I'll do you in 30 years, 40 years when you retire. And then somebody said, no, if you're going to do Steve, you got to do him now. And I realized what a great subject that would be, business and technology. And so I kind of wander back and forth between living people and people who've part of history.
When those list of people there, you've also done work on Jennifer Doudna and Leonardo DaVinci. I blanked there for a second. These are innovators. Like, did you gravitate toward innovators?
Yeah, you've probably had a lot of people in this podcast studio like John Meacham and others who gravitate towards presidents. I've never actually done a president. I like people who are innovators, who are creative, imaginative, think out of the box. And I sometimes think that the technologists and business people are sort of underrepresented in biography, because we write about political leaders a lot. And so I wanted to do Steve Jobs and Elon Musk, because I think they've had more effect of our time than most people. Same with Jennifer Doudna, who created the gene editing technology known as CRISPR. And then I wanted to go back to the roots of innovation and scientific thinking. So I did Leonardo da Vinci and Einstein.
And Da Vinci is such a Renaissance man.
The official Renaissance man. He's the official archetype. He was the one they named it after.
And when you explore a Renaissance man like that, and that's so much before our time, like, how do you wrap your head around living in the world that he would have been living in at that
One
time?
of the wonderful things about Leonardo is he left us 7,200 pages of his notebooks. Paper is a truly wonderful technology. It never runs out of battery. The operating system doesn't have to be redone. And so we can watch each day as his mind dances across different subjects. As you said, he was interested in everything. That's why we call him a Renaissance man. So he'd be doing anatomy, and then he'd be doing math, and then he'd be doing art and sketches and sculptures, all in his notebook. And so I decided to write a book just with the foundation being, let me go page by page through his notebooks.
And then you would go forward to someone like Benjamin Franklin, who in a lot of ways, his predecessor was Da Vinci in terms of being such a
totally, because Benjamin Franklin also was interested in knowing everything you could know about every subject knowable, whether it was music or math or electricity or statecraft. And so by that point, I realized that the thing I loved was people who had a broad array of knowledge and then applied it. And this happens with Ben Franklin. We know him as a, dude flying a kite in the rain. But if you study those electricity experiments, you see them reflected in the Constitution, balances of power, equilibrium of charges, and likewise with Jefferson, who was a great scientist.
You didn't do Jefferson, but you did do The Greatest Sentence Ever Written, which it becomes in a way
collaboration. Yes,
exactly. And so how did then The Greatest Sentence Ever Written come about after doing these biographies?
Well, when I was doing Benjamin Franklin, I was working at CNN, and I did a chapter on the writing of the Declaration. And the Continental Congress had appointed a committee to explain why we're having a revolution. It was probably the last time Congress appointed a great committee. And it had Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson on it. And I watched as they edited that sentence, because if you go to the Library of Congress, you can see the first draft and then the other drafts that lead to the final one, which is in the National Archives. And so looking at how they balance the role of, say, divine providence and endowed by the creator, but also truths being self-evident, not being sacred. That's an edit that Franklin makes. I thought, boy, they were better than we are at realizing that things are balanced. You don't have to be all or nothing in politics. Right. And so for our 250th, I wanted to celebrate the notion of balance that's in that sentence, hoping that would help bring us together in times that have become too polarized.
So when you thought about writing a book on the Declaration, there's a lot of different ways to approach that. It's a big document. You could have written a kind of treatise and a tome on this thing. That's not what you did. You took the second sentence. I want you to kind of explain why you thought, the best approach to this particular document is just to look at every word in this single sentence versus, say, writing on every part of the Declaration.
This sentence becomes our mission statement and what we aspire to be.
Yeah.
And as you know, it doesn't describe where we were in 1776, all men being created equal. This is, but it's used as a forcing mechanism. So 7 years after the sentence, Lincoln is standing there at Gettysburg saying, a nation conceived in liberty and founded on the proposition that all men are created equal. At Gettysburg, he's not just there to give a beautiful speech. He's there to consecrate a graveyard in which 7,056 young men are being buried for having made that sentence a little bit more true. Seneca Falls Declaration, where the women are demanding, they quote that sentence. Martin Luther King's last speech, he quotes that sentence. When LBJ signs the Civil Rights Act, he quotes the sentence. So the sentence becomes, in a time of very troubled partisanship now, the mission statement I think we can all agree on. And whether it was Meacham, Ken Burns, Rick Atkinson, many of us spoke 2 or 3 years ago about, for the 250th, let's just all focus on the basics and remind us why we're all Americans.
Because those are people that didn't sit around agreeing with each other all the time.
No. I mean, you can see Adams, of course, is a great abolitionist. Jefferson is a slaveholder. Franklin had owned 2 slaves and then becomes president of the Society for Abolition of Slavery. And so you see the evolution of their thinking. But as Benjamin Franklin said at the Constitutional Convention, we have to, when we were tradesmen making a joint of wood here in Philadelphia, it didn't fit. You'd shave from one side and take from the other until it fit. And so too here, we have to part with some of our demands. And his point was that compromisers may not make great heroes, but they do make great democracies. And that notion of balance and compromise, which was so prevalent when I was growing up covering politics, whether it was George W. Bush or George H.W. Bush or so many others, even Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, definitely, we've lost that art of saying, let's figure out where our common ground is.
And when we read this book and we look back at those remarkable statesmen, was there something in the water in America, do you think, at that time that led to that? Or is it something that we can get back into the water?
Well, it was challenging times, and sometimes people rise to challenging times, whether it be Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War, or Franklin Roosevelt and others during World War II. Sometimes we don't rise to challenges, and I think there have been some times in recent years where somehow we fractured and don't come together. when I write about Benjamin Franklin, I think he's a really wonderful person. And my book really makes him seem so likable and wise, but he's also human.
Right.
And, he's a human just like everybody else is. And so I don't think we should think these were superhumans. They just rose to the occasion.
Several of these people are innovators. Several of them are Americans, some of them by choice, like Einstein, others by birth. Is there something about America that, in your mind, really leads to innovation?
Absolutely. We're a risk-taking nation, or we have been. I think sometimes now have more regulators than we have risk takers, which is a different subject. Whereas we're a nation that invests in innovation, embraces the new. I was looking at the exhibit here in this wonderful library, and part of it has Edison's sketch for the light bulb patent here at the library now. And I was thinking, well, okay, we're in a time of great technological change, but it's actually no more transformative than it was in the 1880s and 1890s when we got electricity, the light bulb, the telegraph, the telephone, the automobile, oil and gas extraction. All of these things were huge technological advances. And I think we've always been an innovative nation. If you want to go back to the founders, there's just one sentence they put in the Constitution, which is about in order to promote the progress of the useful arts and creativity, we're going to allow patents and copyrights. I've mangled the quote, but it's that sentence saying we're going to be an innovative nation. We're going to let people benefit by whatever intellectual property they create.
Right. When you, as we look at all these people that you've talked to and you've met, is there one that you would love to do a biography of that you haven't? And let's leave it to people that aren't alive, just so we don't offend anybody that's still walking around. Is there someone that you really have your eye on? Without committing to any future projects.
No, I'm doing Marie Curie now.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because she's the last of the great scientists to create the 20th century. And she creates the notion that chemistry is just physics. She's the only person to win 2 Nobel Prizes in different sciences, chemistry and physics. And so I've always, for years, wanted to do Marie Curie, and now her papers are all available. I don't know. Now that I'm doing Marie Curie, I'll probably come back to doing something in the current time. So it'll be about a decade before I say, all right, let me go back in history again. Marie Curie, we kind of make her into this saint, like St. Joan or something, but nobody knows what she actually did.
Yeah.
Fortunately, we have 70 volumes of her notebooks that used to be so radioactive you couldn't touch them, but now you can
literally radioactive
because they were in her lab, and she discovers induced radioactivity late in life, but it's...
Did you touch them?
You have gloves and you wear a shield, now you can. But I think that she is fascinating, partly because, I'll just tell you a story, as I would say. Real quick, November 1911, she's up in Brussels with her best friend Einstein and Paul Langevin, who was her late husband's favorite student, and she's now having an affair with Langevin. And the cable says, you've won your 2nd Nobel Prize, letter to follow. At that same day, the news of her affair with Langevin breaks because Madame Langevin found the letters in their love nest. It's all over the tabloids. Swedish Academy says, it's best if you don't come accept the Nobel. And she says, if I were a man, you wouldn't have said that. My private life has nothing to do with my science. And she goes to Stockholm. Her science at that point is so unbelievably brilliant. She's discovered that the nucleus of the atom radiates. She came up with the name, radioactivity, does particles. And so the only thing she got wrong in that sentence is that her personal life and her professional life were really interwoven with the same traits. That's what biographers do. We try to show how the personal affects the work.
And so I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you. You did a lot of work with President Bush in the Middle East and afterwards as well. Can you talk some about what you're seeing in the Middle East, and as a historian, what do we need to keep in mind as we look at journalistic coverage of what's happening there?
One of the great prides of my life was being head of what was then the U.S.-Palestinian Partnership and then the Middle East Investment Initiative, which Secretary of State Condi Rice asked me to chair, and then President Bush was very supportive. And it made me understand that in the Middle East, especially in places like the Palestinian territories, there are more engineers per capita than almost anywhere else. This is a great, smart region. And if we could just calm some of the waters there, it would be a powerhouse. The Palestinians and Israelis working together like we did during the administration of President George Bush. We had investments together, and it was doing well. I mean, I'm not going to opine on how we can cure the problems at this moment or get too much involved in the politics, but I just know that that's a region that could be thriving, and in many places, you go to UAE or Saudi Arabia now, it's to some extent thriving. But if you could get the Israelis and Palestinians working together, as President Bush was dedicated to doing, not just diplomatically, but by creating economic incentives for them to work together, we could transform the Middle East.
Well, Mr. Isaacson, this has been amazing. I want to make sure we get you in plenty of time to your next stop, which is meeting with President Bush. And
I hope so, yeah.
You've been so generous with your time here and seeing us at the Bush Center. I couldn't thank you enough.
I love being here at the Bush Center. And let me just say one more thing, which is we live in very troubled times. We're all polarized. We all get too addicted to social media that divides us, and politicians that seem to want to enrage or divide us instead of bring us together. I left New Orleans this morning, and the last thing my wife said to me is, please thank President and Mrs. Bush for being the type of leaders they were. They brought us together, and certainly for those of us in New Orleans, we know the service they did after the hurricane.
Mr. Isaacson, well said. I appreciate everything that you've done here with us, and thank you for that note.